This episode is brought to you by Nordstrom. Summer's almost out and fall's calling. Luckily, Nordstrom has everything you need for the season ahead, all under $100. Discover new arrivals from your favorite brands like Mango, Princess Polly, Wave, Free People, BDG, and more. Whether you're planning a last-minute getaway, heading back to class, or refreshing your office looks, you'll find the latest trends and beauty must-haves without breaking your budget. It's easy, too, with free shipping, free returns, and in-store order pickup. Shop today, in stores, and at Nordstrom.com.
This episode is brought to you by Espolón Tequila. Slow, sticky, snoozy. They call these the dog days of summer. But Espolón? They don't do boring. Welcome to the Marg Days. Espolón Tequila. 100% blue Weber agave, born to shake up your summer. Just add lime, agave, and a little attitude. Visit espolontequila.com. Espolón Tequila, 40% alcohol, volume 80 proof. Copyright 2025 Campari America, New York, New York. Drink responsibly.
This is Captain Jim Lovell, an old astronaut that's made 4 very significant flights. Hopefully that the people listening in, especially the young people, will get a good education, kind of follow me in space. And it was a pleasure to be on the Dr. Sky show, and lots of luck to all of you.
Welcome back to our radio show, ladies and gentlemen. A special guest, as always, here on our radio program. And today, in the Dr. Sky mode, we're speaking today with former United States Navy Captain and astronaut Jim Lovell. This particular interview, as we do today, here in December of 2014. Jim Lovell Jr. is a former NASA astronaut and retired captain of the United States Navy, most famous as the commander of the Apollo 13 mission, which suffered a critical failure en route to the moon, but was brought back safely to Earth by the efforts of the crew and mission control. Lovell was also the command module pilot of Apollo 8, the first Apollo mission to enter lunar orbit. Lovell is a recipient of the Congressional Space Medal of Honor and the Presidential Medal of Freedom. He is one of only 24 people to have flown to the moon, the first of only 3 people to fly to the moon twice, and the only one to have flown there twice without making a landing. Lovell was also the first person to fly in space 4 times. And with that, we welcome our very special guest of this particular segment, Jim Lovell, astronaut and retired United States Navy captain. Captain, welcome to our show today, and thank you so much for your service.
Well, my pleasure, Dr. Sky, to talk to you today.
Well, sir, it's an amazing story in the short amount of time we have. Most of the notes that I'm going off of here come from a great book that you and Jeffrey Kluger wrote. Of course, you know it so well, Lost Moon, The Perilous Voyage of Apollo 13, which was then, what, sir, taken into the Tom Hanks movie that everybody knows so well, Apollo 13.
Yes, it was very fortunate that we could write the book, and it was received very graciously, and the book triggered making the movie.
It's a fascinating story here, and again, your time and space, sir, we honor as all of America's astronauts. Let's start off with your early career, knowing that you, of course, were very much instrumental in the Gemini program, this program, Gemini 7, and the missions Gemini 7 and 12. Talk a little bit about those missions, because they also have some historical milestones as duration in time and space and other things. Tell us a little bit about them, Captain.
Well, Gemini 7 and Gemini 12 were 2 actually key missions that led towards the Apollo program. Gemini 7 was a 2-week mission to see if man could live in space for 2 weeks, because that was the maximum length of time they figured that Apollo mission would take. Lots of doctors didn't think that man could live in space for 2 weeks, because when you think about it, we sort of evolved under Earth's gravity, and consequently, was there something that the body needed to be in a gravitational traction of the Earth? Yes. Well, it turned out that that wasn't necessary, and gravity was not required. We did spend the 2 weeks there, very close together, Frank Borman and myself, all the body functions worked normally in zero gravity as they did in in space. There were some changes, however. The heart slowed down because it didn't have to pump against Earth's gravity from the heart up to the head, and also blood. The volume of blood decreased because it wasn't required to have as much blood in our body to counteract Earth's gravity to make sure we had enough to get to the head for all functions. And so something told the body to slow down, slow the heart, reduce the volume of blood, but also the leg muscles deteriorated very rapidly. And when I finally got on that 2-week mission, trying to walk across the carrier deck was a little bit difficult because I had lost all the tone in my muscles, and consequently that meant that on further space flights we had to figure out some way to keep actively physically engaged and to keeping our muscles up to tone. 7 also was the first spacecraft to have a rendezvous with another spacecraft, Gemini 6. Mm-hmm. And they did that towards the end of the Gemini 7 flight. And so there were 2 milestones in Gemini 7. Gemini 12 had a major problem, not a problem, but a major assignment, and that was how men can work outside of a spacecraft. This we thought would be required in Apollo in case we had to manually shift from a lunar module to command module if we couldn't get in through the internal system. Geminis 9, 10, and 11 had tried that as part of their assignments, and each time an astronaut got out in those flights, they overheated, their heart rates went up. They were essentially working against the spacecraft and working against zero gravity because they all forgot Newton's third law of motion, which essentially is to every action there's an equal and opposite reaction.
Exactly.
And since there was zero gravity in the environment at that time, every time they touched the spacecraft, it sort of repelled them. And so on Gemini 12, we used a water tank. Actually, it was a boys' swimming pool, and we put a mock-up of the spacecraft, the back part of the spacecraft, into the water. And then we put Buzz Aldrin into a space suit, which works just as well under the water as it does in space. And we let him go down. We made him neutrally buoyant to make sure, and we told him not to swim. And so it sort of affected just like zero gravity. And in that way, we were able to determine what kind of handholds and footholds and things like that, so that we could work actively outside a spacecraft. And consequently, on Gemini 12, we made 3 spacewalks and had about 5.5 hours. And of course, now if you, or when the orbiter was working all the time, and really with the International Space Station, anytime anyone goes out to work outside, you can see the effects Gemini 12 had on determining how to work actively out there.
Our special guest, ladies and gentlemen, astronaut Jim Lovell, his Gemini spacecraft story. He's telling us the history of Gemini and his involvement in Gemini 7 and 12. But, sir, as you know, and the world knows you and the crew, we move on some 46 years ago. It's hard to believe, Captain, it's been that long ago. The great mission. I remember as a little boy in New York watching on my black and white television the mission we're about to talk about now, Apollo 8. This mission, 6 days, 3 hours and 42 seconds long, launched, as you know, sir, back on December the 21st, 1968. I'm amazed, sir, that we're having this interview today and that you're talking to us about it. I remember distinctly as your command module moves around toward the moon. This is the first time that humans had left the gravity of the Earth in the Apollo spacecraft, and for that matter, the first time that humans had moved out away from planet Earth, correct?
Yes, Gemini 8 or Apollo 8, I should say, was a very significant flight. You have to remember the time span that Apollo 8, when it occurred. For those older folks that are listening in, 1968 was not a very good year in this country. We had, of course, the Vietnam War going on, and many of the people were against that war. We had 2 assassinations of prominent people. We had riots on the colleges and at the Democratic Convention in Chicago. But the end of the year, we did one thing that was was really significant for everybody, that everybody could be proud of and to look back, and that was the flight of Apollo 8. Apollo 8 was going to be an Earth orbital flight, but two things happened in the summer of '68 that changed the mission. The first thing was that we had intelligence information that the Soviets were going to put man around the moon, just not orbit, just to go around and circumnavigate and come back in the late fall of 1968. And the second thing that we heard and, of course, found out about, the Grumman Aircraft Company said that there was no way that they could develop a lunar module for an Earth orbital flight to check it out before the end of 1968. So towards the end of that year, if Apollo 7 was successful in its 11-day Earth orbital flight, that's the command service module without the lunar module, and then we would take Apollo 8, instead of making it an Earth orbital flight with the lunar module, since we didn't have one, we'll send Apollo 8 to the moon. Very bold decision at that time, but it was a wise one. It's the first time the big Saturn V rocket had men aboard. In fact, it was only the third time we flew that rocket, and the first two times we did have some problems with the unmanned flights, but the third flight worked perfectly. We took off on December 21st.
Yes.
I was the navigator of that flight, so we had to navigate the full 240,000 miles all the way out to the Earth. And, of course, it was kind of what I want to say is it was just incidental that we took off on December 21st and we orbited the moon on Christmas Eve, the 24th of December.
Totally amazing, sir. This is an amazing story, and I want to remind our listeners we're coming up to a break here, Captain, in just a moment or so, as we continue to talk with an aviation legend and a space legend himself, Jim Lovell of Apollo 8, Apollo 13, and the previous missions we've talked about, Gemini 7 and Gemini 12, here on our radio show today, talking about the great need for people to learn more about our American history in space, and we do appreciate your time, sir. When we come back from the break, as we continue with astronaut Jim Lovell, we'd like to get into a little bit more about this amazing Apollo 8 mission. If you're old enough like myself to remember, you remember watching your television set and your mouth and your jaw was open and you were watching as these three astronauts, Jim Lovell, Frank Borman, and Bill Anders, circumnavigated the moon, a most amazing journey. And then, yet to come, a most amazing story here about Apollo 13, our special guest, Jim Lovell. His missions on Gemini 7 and 12 continue with Apollo 8, and that most amazing circumnavigation of the moon, the first time that humans had left the Earth. And in this very early stage of the Apollo program, Apollo 8 successfully did and is in the history books, the moon mission. Welcome back, Captain. Let's continue on with Apollo 8. I mean, that's so amazing. Reading verses from the Bible, it probably was probably one of the most all-time watched television shows, in history, if that's correct.
I believe it is. It was, significant that we actually went around the moon on a very significant time of the Earth, which was the holiday season. And while we were going around, or before we took off, actually, we were trying to think of what to say, because we realized that around the Earth at that time would have a lot of people listening in, and we tried to change the words to the night before Christmas or Jingle Bells. Nothing worked until finally we, through a friend, asked a newspaper man. We figured that a newspaper man would be very good in putting some words together that would be appropriate, and so he worked on it for some time. And one evening, when he was trying his best to get some words together and was not successful, his wife came down and asked what he was doing, and he gave her the mission that he was assigned, and she said, well, why don't you just read from the Old Testament, the first 10 verses, of Genesis? That would be appropriate, because the people listening in are not all Christian. That is the basis of many of the world's religions. And so that's what he did. He gave us the first 10 verses of Genesis, and the ninth orbit around the moon, we read that. And it was very appropriate because as we came around the moon each time, we could see this Earth rise. All your listeners have probably seen the famous Earthrise picture.
Oh, a beautiful one. Absolutely.
It's the only color you can see from space, at least where we were. The moon is all shades of gray, but the Earth is very beautiful. And at our distance of about 240,000 miles, you can put your thumb up and actually hide the Earth. Now, we have to think about that for a while. Everything that I ever knew, just 240,000 miles away now, I can put my thumb up and it disappears.
That's incredible. I always wondered about this, Captain. When you're going around the moon, let's say in Apollo 8, how close were you actually above the surface of the moon at the time? That's interesting.
We're about 60 miles above the surface of the moon. Wow. And, of course, we didn't have a lunar module, so we couldn't land, but we could see the craters very, very distinctly. There was one part when we first started to come around. We were looking for initial points to when the flights would start to land, and mainly they were going to go into the Sea of Tranquility in the beginning. Mm-hmm. And as we came around, there was one little triangular mountain that pointed directly to where the landing spot would be in the Sea of Tranquility. And we looked at our maps, and it had not been named. It was in a mountain range called Secchi, but the mountain itself had not been named. And so in the spur of the moment, I decided to name that Mountain Maryland, and it's been that way ever since.
After your wife. That's a beautiful story. In the time remaining, Captain, let's please move forward to this mission, Apollo 13, lifting off, of course, as you know, April 11th, 1970. Interestingly enough, at 1:13 p.m. Houston time, or as a military man you know and others know, 13:13 military time, a numerically inauspicious start, as I'm reading from the book, your book with co-author Jeffrey Kluger, Lost Moon, The Perilous Voyage of Apollo 13. This mission, sir, is just so amazing. I mean, I am just absolutely wanting to hear this, as our listeners are. I have no idea what it's like to sit on top of this large Saturn V stack going to the moon. We've talked to other Apollo astronauts. But the important part is, sir, you're doing everything as you should. And then take the story from there. Somewhere out about 200,000 miles, I understand, you have a cryo tank stir that you're requested to do. Mission Control wants, and then take it from there, because that's the lead point of the story of Apollo 13.
Well, it is about 200,000 miles out. Everything was working perfectly in the spacecraft so far. We were attached to the lunar module. In fact, we could go back and forth, and we had just had a TV program to send down to the Earth on looking at the inside of the lunar module and talking all about it. When, as we were coming back into the mothership, the command module, where the bang had occurred, and we had no idea what it was at first. The first thing we saw was, of course, that we lost some electrical power, and then we ended up losing 2 fuel cells, and wondering what the situation was. We thought at first that a meteor had hit us, yes, or hit the lunar module, and we tried to close the hatch between the two vehicles, much like a submarine crew would try to close the hatch between if there was a leak in a submarine. But that wasn't successful for some reason. We just couldn't get it closed at the time. And so we put it aside, and then I looked out the window, and I can't tell you today why I did that, but then I saw escaping from a high velocity from the rear of my spacecraft yes, gaseous substance, and it turned out to be oxygen that was escaping from our second tank. The first tank, we found out, had already depleted its oxygen because it was where we had the explosion inside the tank, and then it damaged the second tank, and we lost all the oxygen there. So when that occurred, we only had a little amount of time to get into the lunar module to try to use it somehow, some way as a lifeboat to get home. And we also had to do things like transfer all of our guidance information so we know our attitude with respect to the celestial sphere, and that's the way we can navigate. And that happened just at the spur of the moment when we got on the lunar module to try to use it to get home.
Well, Captain, it's amazing, and the ground support here is just so amazing that they actually, working with you and the people, of course, at Mission Control, we all know from historical records here that the burn that you did behind behind the lunar surface, and again, behind the moon, I should say. This was never tested before. I mean, you had an adapted command module with the lunar module. So the engine, basically, of the lunar module pretty much got you guys home. And, well, it's a lot more detailed story than that. But I remember talking to Ecom Cy Liebergott, as you know very well. And we've had interviews with Cy, and what an amazing man, and what an amazing bunch of the people that we talk about as ground support, because obviously without them, this mission could not have, they would never have been able to get you guys back.
Well, that's right. The flight of Apollo 13 was really a classic case of crisis management and how two teams worked closely together, the mission control team and the flight crew, to figure out things to do. Their responsibility, of course, was to make quick and correct decisions, and our obligation was to correctly execute those decisions. Between the two of them, we were able to keep ourselves from being poisoned by our own exhalation. The carbon dioxide was building up, and to get back on the proper courses so we can hit the entry corridor back into the Earth and make a successful landing.
Well, thank God everything worked the way it should, because I'm reading in your book, as you know, you lived the story with the other co-astronauts. Just an amazing and perilous time in space, but a successful return. And wow, it's just great to be hearing you, sir, live here on our show as we do this pre-recorded interview. But I have to go back just one or two final closing questions, as we're about 3 minutes to the top of the hour. I just wanted to mention and ask you, sir, what's your advice for young students today that may not have lived through this period of time? We see today so many opportunities for children and young adults to go into this areas of being an astronaut, an astronomer. Some of the advice from Jim Lovell to the listening audience.
Well, I actually think today there is more of an opportunity for young people to follow a good career, especially we're pushing, of course, this STEM career, yes. Science, technology, environment, and mathematics. And if students, take a strong look at education and apply themselves to it, I think they'll find themselves to have a nice career, regardless of what they do. They all don't have to be astronauts. As a matter of fact, I think the program is kind of slowing down, but they can be good scientists, astronomers, astrophysicists, or technicians, yes. or just any kind of an engineering program. It's quite rewarding to do that, and they just have to put their mind to it.
What's Jim Lovell's opinion of where we are in space, manned space program? If Jim Lovell was in charge, where would we be going, and would we be doing the same things that NASA's doing today?
Well, hopefully that we will get back on track. Fortunately, that last flight of the Orion, which was just a very short flight, but it proved out to be very successful. I hope that we can someday go back to the moon and really explore the moon. We barely, touched it at all on our 6 flights there, and the technology and the infrastructure that we developed to make some, regular explorations of the moon can then be modified and used to eventually go to Mars, and that's where I wish that the program would go.
Captain Lovell, I want to thank you for your time, and above all, I want to thank you for your service to the United States of America, not only in the astronaut corps, but in your military career. A legend in space, ladies and gentlemen. We're honored to have him today. Flights on Gemini 7 and 12, Apollo 8, around the moon 46 years ago, an amazing flight, and even more incredible, the flight and saga of Apollo 13 back in 1970. Captain Lovell, stay with us on the line. I want to thank you so much for your time today, and do appreciate that here on our radio stations, that folks listen to this particular show here around the nation and around the world. Our special guest today, astronaut, space legend, in my opinion and the opinion of many others, Captain Jim Lovell. Thank you, Captain Lovell, for your time today.
Oh, my pleasure, Dr. Sky. My pleasure. It was nice talking to you.